Welcome to the Organic Transition for Specialty Crops webinar. This is a webinar supported by the Indiana Organic Network. We have some more webinars coming up in our webinar series for 2025, and we'll provide some information about that at the very end. In the meantime, I am excited to be here with you. My name is Ashley Adair. I am the Extension Organic Agriculture Specialist here at Purdue. I work in the Horticulture and Landscape Architecture Department, but I do work with both specialty crops and grain crops. So I have quite a few different responsibilities across the university and have a diverse background when it comes to serving growers with different cropping systems needs. So I'm excited to tell you a bit about organic transition in vegetable crops in particular, which is where most of my experience lies. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So I want to lead off with, when you hear the term organic agriculture, what comes to mind? Oftentimes I'll hear people say that it makes them think about farming naturally or farming without chemicals. Or it may make them think of specific kinds of food they can find at the grocery store that has the organic label on it. So, organic agriculture encompasses all of these things, but I kind of want to start with some historical context because organic agriculture, or what we call organic agriculture today, is the original agriculture that has been practiced for thousands of years. An example here, we see Three Sisters plantings, or really a type of intercropping that we would call today, in the Ozarks. So this is native women that have planted Three Sisters planting. So that's corn, pole beans, and squash. Each of those crops having a specific purpose within the planting. So, for example, the corn is a food source, but it also provides a trellis for the pole beans. The pole beans climb on that trellis of corn and provide nitrogen to the corn and the squash. And the squash grows around the bottom of both of these plants, helping to shade out weeds and hold the soil together. Another important thing to think about when it comes to organic agriculture is the historical context around soils and soil science. And actually, Aristotle, the philosopher, was the originator of what we now call the humus theory, or the idea that soil is, quote, a vast stomach that processes and supplies nutrients to plants. We now know that microbes and organic matter complete these processes, and that humus itself is kind of dubious as far as its existence goes. And that gets into some current soil science that we don't have time to delve into today. But the idea that soil is more of an organism or a stomach or something that can really store, process, and supply nutrients still is practical to think about today. So let's fast forward to the turn of the century. So we're going to start in 1900 and work our way up to 2002, kind of focusing in on what organic agriculture and farming in general looked like in Indiana and the Midwest. So here in the 1900s, families in Miami County, Indiana are involved in a threshing operation where a mix of animal power and machine power are being used to complete the task. So the rise of modern agriculture kind of starts to begin at this turn of the century moment. So we see this combination of horse-drawn implements as well as mechanization. And we also, at this time, come up against the advent of the Haber-Bosch process, which is the process in which natural gas is converted into ammonia. That process was originally used to manufacture explosives for World War I and World War II, but, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing here, this process will become integral to modern agriculture by mid-century. There are a few important figures to think about when it comes to organic agriculture in the world and in the US. First, we're starting in Europe. In the 1920s, Rudolf Steiner, who's the man in the top left next to the Demeter Certified Biodynamic logo, Rudolf Steiner gave a series of lectures that were called The Spiritual Foundations for the Renewal of Agriculture in Europe, in Austria specifically. He described how farms should be viewed more like a self-contained organism rather than a factory turning inputs into outputs. Although he wasn't an agricultural scientist by trade, his lectures were considered the first formal educational programs on organic agriculture as we know it today, and he eventually led to the formation of the biodynamic standard. And we can talk a little bit about the biodynamic standard later on if anyone is interested. But in short, biodynamic agriculture is very similar to USDA certified organic, but there are some added components of closing the loop on inputs. So all inputs on the farm must be self-derived on the farm. And there's also some spiritual concepts that are involved with that certification as well. Fast forwarding a couple decades to the 1940s, we see Sir Albert Howard, the man in the top right next to the book An Agricultural Testament. Sir Albert Howard published this book in Britain, and it was considered one of the first, quote, modern publications to suggest that soil fertility should be actively maintained and that we should look to nature for methods on how to maintain soil fertility. He discusses concepts that we're increasingly becoming more familiar with today, like mycorrhizal fungi and the importance of soil water. Howard got his experience in this space as an agricultural advisor to the government of India during British occupation and learned from Indians on how to make compost. Howard is sometimes known as the father of compost for his work extending the knowledge of composting in this Indian way to others around the world. Also in the 1940s, shifting to the woman on the bottom of the slide, that is the Lady Eve Balfour. She published a work called The Living Soil in 1943. Lady Balfour was one of the first women to study agriculture at an English university, and she was also the founder and first president of the Soil Association in England, which is an organization that continues to operate today. Lady Eve Balfour ran the Hawley experiment. So this was the first comparison of chemical farming methods with organic farming methods in the world. And she wrote a book about the experiment, which turned out to be The Living Soil. The book also promotes the idea that the way we treat our soil is reflected in the quality of our food and our health, which is a concept that runs through today. Shifting over to the United States, we have several different figures that are important for the organic movement here, but I'm focusing on just a couple here this evening. So the first is J.I. Rodale, there on the top left, publisher first and farmer second. He was originally a publisher of a variety of periodicals and publications, including the one you see there on the top left called Organic Gardening and Farming, which really started to become popular in the 50s and continued on through some of the organic and health food movement in the United States of the 60s and 70s. J.I. Rodale was the founder of the Rodale Institute, so that's where his name might sound familiar to some of you if you've been involved in agriculture for a very long time. That picture on the bottom left is a photo of the original Rodale Institute facility in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. That facility still exists today and is Rodale's flagship research operation, where they have run a long-term cropping systems experiment comparing conventional agriculture with organic agriculture since the 1980s. It's the longest running experiment of its kind here in the United States. So Rodale Institute does publish work regularly from this experiment, and they also have research stations in other parts of the country, including the Southeast and the Midwest. On the right, both of those pictures are of George Washington Carver, who we know as the Tuskegee Institute scientist and extension professional that's largely responsible for the many, many uses of peanuts. That was a way to promote peanuts as an important agricultural commodity in the South. So while George Washington Carver is not explicitly an organic researcher, much of his work promoting soil health and introducing legume crops to the South and Southeast as a rotational crop influence what we know about organic agriculture management and crop rotation today. And he is seen here pictured with a couple of his extension bulletins that were published during his time at Tuskegee. So, for example, on the left, you see some possibilities of the cowpea in a county in Alabama. And so, using cowpea as a cash crop. And that's also a crop that we use as a cover crop in certain parts of the world, particularly in the warmer, cooler parts of states like Indiana. And also on the right, his publication, How to Build Up and Maintain the Virgin Fertility of Our Soils. So he published many different extension bulletins during his career at Tuskegee and previously at Iowa State. So he was a pretty prolific writer and was very good at outreach, even if he was not explicitly an organic professional. Also, during the 1940s, we're heading back to Indiana. This is in Porter County, so up north near the lake. This farmer, his name is Pete Hanrahan, and he is using a spring-tooth harrow to prepare a field at his farm, Sunset Hill Farm. Um, this is a representation of how tractors are becoming more commonly used in agriculture at the time. So, thinking back to that first image we saw in the 1900s, it's only 4 decades later, less than a human lifetime, and we're already seeing the implementation of tractor agriculture on a wider scale. So, in the 1940s in particular, tractors with rubber tires are introduced. And overall, farm productivity is increasing at a very rapid rate. Ammonia that is produced from that Haber-Bosch process I mentioned earlier is now being diverted from explosives production and into fertilizer. So this is one of the more common types of synthetic fertilizer that we see used in conventional agriculture today. This time period is one of major change from what we would think of as traditional farming methods at the time into the more modern farming methods that we see today. So, in other words, this is the time when the Green Revolution is beginning. Fast forwarding a little bit to the 1970s, the Green Revolution continues at this time, and we are now in Iowa. So, this is an era of technological adoption, market development, and crop improvement. And during this time, between roughly the 1940s and the 1980s, we're seeing increases in yield and rapid adoption of new technologies in farming. So by the 1970s, in addition, the environmental movement is taking place, which inspired some farmers across the country to sort of take a step back from what they viewed as environmentally dangerous and adopt, or I guess you could say, readopt organic farming methods. However, what the term organic really meant at this time was up to interpretation. There seemed to be a general consensus on the philosophy behind organic farming. So, thinking of avoiding pesticides, avoiding synthetic fertilizer, and adopting more soil friendly production methods. But there wasn't really any consistency from state to state or certifying agency to certifying agency. So, in this image, we see the farmer Clarence Van Sant harvesting organic soybeans on his central Iowa farm. And so at the time, there wasn't any consistency across products that were farmed in a so-called organic way. Different states may have had certification programs, but if those crops were sold across state lines, there wasn't really any consensus on how that crop was grown and what that standard really meant in the marketplace. So one person's organic in Iowa might look very different from another person's organic in New England. So, fast forwarding another 20 years or so, by this time in 1990, Congress had started to recognize a need for developing an organic standard. And so they passed the Organic Foods Production Act. This act set into motion the development of national standards for organic production across the agriculture industry. The act also handed regulatory responsibility off to the USDA as the federal agency to oversee this. And it also created the National Organic Standards Board, which is an organization that still exists today and uses appointed volunteers to help continue to develop the organic standard, which is a living document. By 2000, we have the National Organic Program final rule. And this was established at the very end of the year in December. And this rule is federal law. So this standardizes organic practices across all 50 states. And you can find all of the regulations that make up this federal law in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is actually linked here. This law governs not only how farms produce organic food in the United States, it also governs the labeling of food, which we'll discuss later, if anyone is interested. The NOP final rule also includes the national list of allowed and prohibited substances, which is one of the most important documents for organic farmers and food producers to understand. So this list does change somewhat from time to time. So the National Organic Standards Board, which we'll talk about in the next slide, they meet a couple of times a year. And one of the major agenda items that they deal with is adding and removing and discussing items that are on this national list of allowed and prohibited substances. If you are considering organic certification, it is really important that you actually take some time to go and read through some of that national list so that you understand in a little bit better detail, maybe with a little extra context about which substances you would be allowed to use on your farm. So the National Organic Standards Board is the organization that is responsible for making recommendations to the USDA to change organic rules or pass rules such as the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule. This is a volunteer organization made up of 15 people. They are appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture, and they generally represent a wide variety of aspects of the organic community. Each person on the NOSB serves a 5-year term, and ultimately the NOSB's job is to explore current issues in organic agriculture, and then they make recommendations on those issues. So in addition to making recommendations on specific problems such as supply chain issues, which is what the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule addresses, they can make changes to the national list of allowed and prohibited substances and discuss other items that may be salient and important to organic farmers at any given time. They generally meet twice a year, and this meeting, like most other government meetings, are open to the public, and they also accept written and oral public comments. So you, as a grower, are welcome to make comments on various rules that the National Organic Standards Board may consider recommending to the USDA. If the NOSB decides to make a vote on something, votes only pass to become recommendations if a 2/3 majority votes yay on a particular issue. I can show you what the spring 2025 work agenda looks like here in a little bit if anyone is interested. But I can say that one of the biggest and most recent pieces of legislation that NOSB was involved with is the Strengthening Organic Enforcement Rule, which I've mentioned a couple times now, which requires a strengthening of oversight across the production, handling, and sale of organic products. So this rule has affected everyone in the organic supply chain, including farmers, importers, exporters, handlers, and processors. And in short, the rule requires more businesses along the supply chain to be certified organic and subject to inspection than previously. It also requires import certificates for all organic imports, regardless of equivalency rules across certain international borders. So we have equivalency rules with the European Union, for example. And it also requires farmers to do more record keeping in reference to traceability and fraud prevention procedures in particular. So it added some extra bureaucracy to what we already do in organic certification, but the idea is to help make sure, in particular, that foreign imports are actually coming from farms that are producing to the USDA organic standard and are not doing any erroneous practices. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of certification, I do want to take a look at some of the just generalities that make organic agriculture different from conventional. And these overarching themes that we'll discuss in the next few minutes will provide some context on most of what is included on the national list of allowed and prohibited substances and help you understand the spirit of the law of the organic standard. So, how is organic agriculture different from conventional? In general, organic ag is going to use a few different alternative strategies to accomplish similar goals that we have across farming generally. So, instead of using crop protection products to manage insects and disease, organic growers are pretty well limited to using crop rotation, which is a really important concept, if not the most important concept to get used to when it comes to organic agriculture. Organic growers also use composting and manure application instead of using synthetic fertilizers. Uh, Manure from conventional farms is acceptable for use on organic farms, and that is partly because there would be an enormous supply chain bottleneck on manure if manure was required to come from organic animals. Um, that is just a simple fact that we do not have enough certified organic livestock operations to supply the fertility needed to all the certified vegetable, row crop, and other types of farms that are out there. In addition, tillage and exclusion techniques are used instead of herbicides and pesticides for weed control and pest control. And finally, only OMRI listed or NOP approved inputs may be used instead of many of the synthetic products that are used in conventional ag. OMRI listed means that a product has been vetted by a third party called the Organic Materials Review Institute. That's that logo there on the left. It's one of the most reliable and common organic labeling um, schemes that you will find on inputs at the big box store, at the grocery store, wherever you can find these types of organic inputs. You will likely find some OMRI listed products that you can be 100% certain that it will be allowed for use on your organic farm. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, or that doesn't mean that you should not tell your certifier that you're planning to use a product because you have to maintain a list. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But OMRI listed is a safe bet for you if you are interested in using organic products. Organic agriculture ultimately, though, is not entirely dissimilar from conventional. Both organic and conventional farmers, if they're sustainably minded, are going to be focusing on a few different things on their farms, including minimizing off-farm inputs that helps reduce environmental and financial impact. They're going to be trying to diversify their production to address many of their previous goals, as well as to increase their financial resilience. And they will also try to use reduced tillage practices and or mindful tillage practices to minimize soil health disturbance. So let's jump into a few of the products that you might commonly find used on organic vegetable farms. So in addition to using cover crops as a fertility input, there's a number of other helpful inputs that are either plant-based or animal-based that can be used to either supply or supplement a farm with nutrients. By and large, on an organic farm and with the products that you're going to use, these are slow release products. These are not going to be able to supply nutrients immediately to plants, so it takes some time for these products to be processed by the soil and the microbes that live in the soil. And generally, these products are going to contain less nitrogen by percentage than conventional products. So, corn gluten meal is actually one of the higher nitrogen content fertilizers you'll find available for organic use at 9%. But if you compare these numbers to the numbers for something like urea, which is about 46% nitrogen, so something that is very commonly used in conventional systems, especially large scale ones, the organic products are starting to look a little bit less high octane at that point. So some plant byproducts you might find include alfalfa meal, corn gluten meal, cottonseed hulls, soybean meal, and also plant-based compost. Compost can also be animal-based, which is a little bit of a different story on the rules required for applying it. Then you have all these different animal byproducts, which include manure, blood meal, feather meal, fish emulsion, back guano, etc. Many of these products you can find in small quantities at big box stores, garden centers, that kind of thing. But you can find larger quantities at other dealers that are out there. Composting folks like Morgan Composting and Ohio Earth Food. You can find some of these products in larger quantities at those locations. So, a word about manure. Manure can only be used on a vegetable farm under the organic standard if it is one, composted beforehand, or two, if it's raw, it must be applied a minimum of 90 days before harvest if the produce does not touch the ground. So think about tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, Brussels sprouts, that kind of thing. Or if the produce does touch the ground, so think about melons, leafy greens, potatoes, that kind of thing, carrots. Then manure must be applied a minimum of 120 days before harvest. So this is called the 90-120 day rule. It's in the organic standard specifically. It's probably a good idea to follow this rule whether you're organic or not. But it is in the organic standard, and it is actually not based on any scientific study. We have a researcher here at Purdue that is doing some work on integrated crop and livestock systems and raw manure application and looking at some of the food safety and soil health implications of raw manure application. But as the organic standard currently stands, the 90 to 120 day rule is the rule of the law. And if you are found in violation of that rule, you can get into some trouble with your organic certifier. It is just generally a good idea to be following that, if at all possible. So there's some other inputs that we should consider when it comes to pesticides. Organic agriculture does allow the use of pesticides. They are just very specific types of pesticides, and these pesticides are generally preventative and not persistent in the environment. The insecticides in particular, so the materials there that you see on the right, those include biologicals like natural enemies and pathogens, as well as botanicals, which include plant essential oils and a specific class of plant products called pyrethrins that are really similar to pyrethroids, which are the synthetic version, but have very similar effects. There's also minerals and soaps and oils. Soaps and oils are used for both plant disease control as well as insect pest control. On the plant side of things, we have a few different biologicals that may be used, including competitive bacteria and fungi that you can apply directly to the surface of plants that will help prevent your plant from getting infected by other nastier baddies. As well as some different metals and minerals. So, kaolin clay is a mineral that you can apply to the leaf surface that helps prevent fungi and other pathogens from actually getting a foothold and infecting a leaf. Then there's also products that are copper-based or products like Bordeaux mixture, which is actually a very old formulation that contains copper that it was traditionally used in vineyards to help prevent grapevines from getting sick with different kinds of fungal infection. These types of products, the heavy metals, not the kaolin clay. The kaolin clay is pretty harmless, but unless you're breathing it in, which we don't want you to do, always follow the label on these products just like you would with any other type of pesticide. But copper-based products can build up in the soil over time, so judicious and smart use of these products is really essential for making sure that we don't have some negative soil health implications after the fact. A couple of notes here to mention. So one of the more common insect control products is BT. So that's Bacillus thuringiensis. That product is a bacterium that is ingested and causes insects that ingest it to starve to death. Basically, their guts explode, which sounds like a pretty nasty way to go, if I'm being honest. But that's a product that is not super persistent in the environment. In fact, it breaks down under sunlight, under UV light, within 24 to 48 hours. And then there's also diatomaceous earth, which is basically the skeletons of a bunch of little diatoms that can be harvested from water. And they're very sharp. So when they're consumed by an insect, it tears them up on the inside and then they die because they're unable to eat. Diatomaceous earth can be found in food grade forms, so it's actually something that is edible, but it is something you want to be really careful with in terms of respiration. So when you apply that product, make sure that you are wearing the respirator that the label says you should be wearing to protect your lungs, because it can be pretty nasty on the lungs. So that's just a few different words about the different kinds of pesticides we might be able to use in organic agriculture here in the US. I want to mention some of the USDA crop production standards as we're getting into the nuts and bolts here. So, the organic transition requires that we do not apply any prohibited substances from that national list of allowed and prohibited substances list for at least 3 years before harvesting an organic crop. The standard also requires that no materials used in organic production are produced through genetic engineering. There is no use of ionizing radiation, so in particular for sanitizing produce or for sanitizing water during washing and packing. There is no use of sewage sludge for fertilizer allowed. So on some conventional farms, sewage sludge from sewage treatment plants might be used as a fertilizer source that is cheap and relatively easy to get a hold of, depending on how close you are located to a sewage treatment plant. But for organics, sewage sludge contains some heavy metals, pharmaceutical residues, some other things that we don't want in the soil in our organic produce. So that is not allowed for our use in organic agriculture. A word on seed. Organic seed is preferred, but in the case that a variety you are seeking out is either sold out or is not available in an organic form, you may use conventional seed as long as you can document that there is no organic option available and that there are no seed treatments used. We can talk about this in a little bit more detail later on. I'll show you what documentation for an organic seed search looks like. And then finally, pests, weeds, and diseases must be managed through physical, mechanical, and biological controls, and all of that must be included as a general guideline in a document called the Organic Systems Plan, which you put together prior to your organic certification. It's a document that is required for your certifier to keep on hand to make sure that you are following a set plan in place to help you with your organic practices. Now, there are some synthetic substances that are allowed for crop production. These include alcohols and some chlorine compounds that may be used for sanitizing purposes and cleaning tools. Also, copper sulfate, hydrogen peroxide, some soap-based herbicides, because soap is technically synthetic. Soap-based herbicides are typically used for right-of-ways and ornamental crops only. You may also use materials like newspaper in compost. The ink and the paper type are somewhat restricted. They need to be coming from natural sources, and the paper cannot be glossy paper. Horticultural oils are allowed, and then micronutrients. So, one example of a micronutrient deficiency that you might come across on your farm is something like boron. Boron deficiency can cause some kind of weird growth habits in some vegetable plants, thickened stems, curling leaves, actually some stuff that can kind of look like herbicide damage if you're looking at it kind of sideways. But if you can document that your plants, either through a tissue sample or through a soil sample, are deficient in a particular nutrient, synthetically produced products like boron can be applied to the fields and can be used as a supplement to your existing nutrient management plan. There are also some non-synthetic substances that are prohibited for use in organic crop production. So these might not be surprising because we understand that many of these are toxic. But things like arsenic, tobacco ash, lead, and lead salts, strychnine, and a few other things are among the compounds that we don't allow for use in organic agriculture. So here's where you can find the national list of allowed and prohibited substances. Let's go ahead and take a look at the link here. See if we can bring up my browser window. All right, so hopefully you're still seeing my screen there. So this is what the the ECFR National List of Prohibited Substances look like. I encourage you to take a look at this list. This list is linked at the end of this presentation in the resources slide. There's a lot to look at here, but it's fairly plain language. So if there is any question about a particular product, so for example, copper sulfate, it will tell you what this is used for. So this is specifically used as an algicide in organic aquatic rice systems, and it is limited to one application per field during any 2-year period. So there are some nuances here that this list will actually explore. If you have questions about anything that you find on this list, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or reach out to an organic certifier for more information. There's also some things in this list that are specific to livestock production. So, for example, under 205.603, synthetic substances allowed for use in organic livestock production, you will see things like aspirin listed to help relieve inflammation. Vaccines are allowed, but there are some other products in here that either require some nuance or may only be allowed to be applied within a certain time period based on a specific issue that's happening in livestock. We're not focusing on livestock tonight, but I figured that I would share with you that this national list of allowed and prohibited substances also includes some considerations for livestock production as well as food processing. All right, so let's bounce out of here real quick and head back to the presentation. So now let's talk about organic certification and the whole procedure for getting certified. 3 easy steps: find a certifier, develop an organic systems plan, and begin your transition, and then schedule an inspection. But there's a little more to it than just 3 steps. So let's go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first step is arguably the easiest one, in my opinion. You need to find a certifier to work with during your organic transition process and eventually through your inspection and certification. So organic certifiers are actually third-party accredited organizations by the USDA that have the authority to inspect farms and issue organic certificates. The USDA does not certify farms on its own. The USDA is the regulatory body that enforces the rules, but they accredit third-party certifiers that operate throughout the country because the USDA does not have enough manpower to actually do this certification on its own. In general, you can expect a farm with a relatively simple organic systems plan to cost around $1,200 to certify. But since there are 75 plus certifiers that operate in the United States, you can imagine that the fee schedule is going to vary somewhat from certifier to certifier. One farm that might cost $1,200 with one certifier might be $1,600 with another. So it's important to shop around because $1,200 versus $1,600 is not chump change. It is something that is important to consider. It's important to shop around not only for that price point, but also for the various customer service and paperwork approaches that each of these certifiers may employ. Until very recently, the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, was offering the Organic Certification Cost Share Program, or OCCSP. And that program is something that any farmer that is applying for organic certification could apply for, and they could offset the cost of their certification by about $750, or 75% of the cost of certification up to $1,000. So I'm really hoping that NRCS brings that program back because it's really helpful for transitioning producers and currently certified producers to kind of help offset some of the costs that are involved with the certification process. Here are a few examples of organic certifiers that operate in the state of Indiana. There are a total of 19 certifiers that are operating in Indiana. So there's quite a few to choose from. There is one certifier that's actually headquartered here in Indiana, and that is the one on the bottom center on this slide. That's OnMark Certification Services. They're located up in Elkhart, Indiana. The rest of these certifiers are not headquartered in Indiana, but they have a service area that reaches Indiana. And I know growers that use at least one grower each for each of these certifiers here. The USDA organic certification process might look a little bit different in terms of the paperwork with each of these certifiers and in terms of the fees, but at the end of the inspection, the organic symbol still means the same thing. So you could pick any one of these certifiers, and USDA Organic as a certification is equivalent with each of these. So let's talk about the transition process. So transition takes 36 months, and it begins the moment that you decide to apply your last prohibited input. So if you look at that national list, and let's say you used an application of Roundup to kill some grass to prepare for a new garden bed on your market garden that you would like to certify as organic. So from that last prohibited input application, let's say it's May 25th of this year, so May 25th of 2025. Now you begin to manage that land and that farm fully under organic practices, keeping organic records that are detailed and organized, and following your organic systems plan, which there's a template I can show you that you can kind of practice filling one out so that you know what that looks like. So then we cycle through the next 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months. So basically, by the time you get to May 25th of 2028, that is when your 36-month period is complete. And as soon as you get to May 26th, you may begin to market your produce as organic and use the USDA organic label on your produce or at your farm to advertise that you have achieved that status. Now, this is pending inspection. So I would generally recommend that you have your inspection and make sure that your inspection goes well before you start using that symbol, because the inspector is responsible for making sure that you are certified and following all the rules. There are a couple of exceptions to the transition process. The first one, which is actually more common than you would think, is that fields that have been fallow, neglected, or otherwise untreated, haven't had any non-approved substances applied, those fields may qualify for organic status more or less immediately. You can record the information about that field and its use of different substances on a form called the Prior Land Use Declaration, or PLUD. And that form can be found in the various paperwork documents from your certifier. The other exception to the transition rule is if you sell less than $5,000 in organic products per year, you are technically classified as exempt and you are not required to file for organic inspection, or for that matter, be inspected. You may not use the organic seal, however, if you are an exempt operation. That constitutes an illegal use of that symbol, and you would be subject to fines if you're using the organic symbol. So let's talk a little bit about that organic seal. So this is something that you'll see at the grocery store. You might see it at the farmer's market. This seal represents the farms and products that are certified organic according to the USDA standards, and it shows that they have been inspected and vetted by that third-party accredited certifier. Farms and products that have not been certified, or those that have had their certification suspended or revoked, which are two categories that you generally don't want to find yourself in as an organic grower, those folks may not use the organic seal. Certification that has been suspended, that's usually for a non-compliance, such as not communicating with the certifier, or a handful of other issues that will require your farm to go into a suspension while you're fixing the problem. Occasionally, herbicide drift will cause a suspension. This is a really unfortunate issue that can sometimes happen to farms that might be next door neighbors to a conventional grower. But generally, certifiers will look at that situation and say, okay, the spot that was drifted on, block that off. You can't harvest from that area, but your entire farm is not suspended. So those are a couple situations you might come across. Now, the situation you really don't want to find yourself in is having your organic certification revoked. That means that you have done something egregious in terms of non-compliance, and that you are no longer allowed to represent your farm as organic, and you will not be able to reapply for organic status. So that's basically your certification has been taken away and won't be given back. Now, Now, if operations are found in violation of rules about using the organic seal, so if they're misrepresenting their products as organic as an exempt farm, or if they are misrepresenting their products as organic while under a suspension or revocation status, they may be fined up to $11,000 per incident. And that is no chump change either. So I would highly recommend that you use the symbol only after you have been certified as an organic farm or having organic products. So let's talk about developing an organic systems plan. So basically, this is all about record keeping and following a plan for your farm to maintain its status as organic. Farms have to keep a variety of detailed records, and what is in this slide is just one example of the types of records that are kept on hand for your certifier. This is a field map at Christopher Farm in Modoc, Indiana, and this is what the field plan looked like June going into July of 2024. And one reason why the field map is so important is because of a concept called the mass balance. When you have an organic inspection, the inspector will take a look at all of your sales records, weights, and quantities of items that you harvested and compare that to your field maps and your records of your seed packets, seed tags, and what you planted, and make sure that those numbers match up. So they want to make sure that what you have planted and recorded as having planted matches up with the amount of things that you sold later in the year. So at first, these record-keeping requirements might appear overwhelming, but you might be surprised at how many of the records that are kept for organic certification are records that farmers should probably be keeping on hand anyway. Now, the level of detail that goes into the mass balance side of things, that's probably not a normal record-keeping practice for most farms unless they're really interested in analyzing data at the end of every season, which I've met several farmers who are. But having organized and detailed records makes the inspection process much, much easier. I'll show you an example of an OSP and organic certification application here in a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit in more detail about some of the record keeping that is important as well. So the more organized your records are, the better. I don't know how often I can hammer that home. I deal with organic certification at two different farm sites for research here at Purdue. One of them is a grain farm. The other one is a vegetable farm. And I work with researchers on their research projects that are doing research in these organic plots. And so I have to make sure that they're able to provide me with their field activities, their seed tags. In some cases, the researcher might be buying their own inputs. In some cases, I might be handling that. So it's a little bit extra complicated for me. But if you are just one farmer with a set of employees, the sooner you find an organization method that keeps you on task and keeps all of these things organized and ready to show to a certifier at a moment's notice, the better. So you will be keeping records such as field activities, which includes planting, harvesting, weeding, fertilizing, irrigation schedules, that kind of thing. You'll want to keep a hold of your seed packets and seed tags, whether it's a cover crop or a vegetable crop or a perennial crop, anything along those lines. You'll want to keep those seed packets, tags, or plant material tags. So like if you're planting asparagus crowns or strawberries, for example. You'll want to keep your planting and harvest schedule ready and available, your sales records for that traceability component, your field maps, your land use history will also be important, particularly in the organic systems plan side of things, and then any planned inputs that you are thinking of using on your farm. So that includes fertilizers, organic fertilizers, different pesticides, soil amendments, etc. And you must keep these on file for no fewer than 5 years. So that's kind of the statute of limitations on organic certification. Keep records for 5 years. So keep a binder, for example, that you keep on hand that is just, this is the 2025 binder. It has all my seed packets in it. It has all this different stuff in it. You can use the template that is provided by the USDA. So if you look at my screen here, this is the USDA's website on what you need to know about creating an organic systems plan. And there are some sample templates that you can download here. So we'll pull that up real quick. If it will, let's do the crop production one. I'll put this on, where did the desktop go? Oh, there it is. Drop that on the desktop and we'll take a look here. All right, so here is our OSP template. This is something that it looks a little bit different with most certifiers, but this is a good spot to start practicing your organic systems plan. A lot of things here are check boxes. There's a few form fields to fill in. Um, it's important to go through here and just kind of understand the scope of everything that you should be thinking about as you produce or plan to produce organic crops. Soil management and crop rotation is a pretty meaty section. It's important to think carefully through how you might be doing that on your farm, on your soil types, and your soil drainage. So there's several sections in here that I encourage you to look at on your own time. And if you have any questions about anything that's in here, I am happy to consult with you one-on-one and just give you some guidance on what this might look like for your specific farm. So we'll pop out of there for a second, back to the slides. Let's talk a bit about inspection. So I've been through a few different organic inspections now in my role here at Purdue. This past year, we had 2 inspections. So our vegetable operation at Meigs Horticultural Research Facility south of Lafayette added a greenhouse component this year. And incidentally, we also went through an organic certification reinstatement because the site was under suspension last year. So we wanted to bring that back online. And we had an inspection in November where our certifier, Dakari, who's pictured there on the right, he came up and spent some time with us in the field at Meigs, as well as in our greenhouse research facility here at Purdue, where transplant production for the organic transplants takes place. In a field crop setting, like on the right, where our on-mark inspector came out to meet with the NEPAC, Northeast Purdue Ag Center staff, this is where our grain field is. We actually walk out in the field, talk a little bit about what the research is that's going on out there and any particular problems or issues that we're having with the organic production side. So long story short, once you have created your OSP and that 3-year transition process is complete, your certifier will give you a call after they receive your application that you've sent in with all your fees paid, and they're going to schedule you for an inspection. The inspection is basically an opportunity for the inspector who's representing the certifier, may or may not be a full-time employee there. That certifier is going to review your records, like your input labels, sales records, field maps, seed storage, etc., and address any potential pitfalls or non-compliances. So these inspections could take anywhere from 1 to 3 hours in my experience. And depending on the size and the scope of the farm, how many records you will need to review, that's why that inspection can kind of vary in length. The first inspection you have will likely take the longest because that certifier and that inspector are getting to know you for the first time and really getting an understanding of the scope of your farm. Results of an inspection can take a month or 2 to come back to you. Many times, I personally have received my organic certificate for a particular farm site in January, and then I'm immediately hit with emails requesting the reapplication paperwork and fees for the next season. So sometimes it can take a while for the certificate to come in, and then you're immediately hit with all the to-do list items for the next year. I should also mention that surprise inspections are also a possibility. With the new strengthening organic enforcement rule, certifiers are now required to conduct unannounced inspections of at least 5% of their client base each year. Operations that are chosen for unannounced inspections may be random, they may be risk-based, or they might be the result of a complaint or investigation. So the certifying agent should disclose to the operation what the reason was for this unannounced inspection. And in addition, the unannounced inspections have 4 hours or less of advanced notice. So that's not a whole lot of time to get all your records together. So you best be keeping them all the time, every time, so that in case you do get an unannounced inspection, you are ready for it. I realize we're running a little bit past 7 p.m. right now, but we did get started a bit late, so I'm going to keep going through these last few slides. If you need to jump off the call, that is perfectly okay. This is being recorded, so you'll have access to this after the fact through the Indiana Organic Network website, and we'll share that link with those who registered once that recording is ready. So a few tips for an efficient inspection. Keep all your records in an easily accessible place. So whether that's your farm office or if it's a specific shelf in the pack shed, as long as it doesn't get wet, keep them in a place that's easily accessible so that you, your employees, and your organic inspector can access those items easily to either record new information for the records or to access them for inspection. Consider filing all of your physical items, such as seed tags, input labels, sales receipts, field activity records, etc., in a binder. Or alternatively, electronic records can be used. And for example, I know some farmers that have specific photo albums on their phones that they use for all their seed tags, labels, and receipts. They might take pictures of different field operations that they do during the year. Really, at the end of the day, you should find a record keeping system that works well for you and your employees. Same thing for tracking sales. You should track sales in such a way that it makes sense for you, but also in a way that you can cross-reference them with your field maps and your seed packets and tags for that mass balance audit process. In general, err on the side of over documenting rather than under documenting. And I should also mention that your certifier and your inspector are not there to get you in trouble. If there is something missing from your documentation, you can provide it later. They may record a minor non-compliance because of this, but as long as you give the inspector the information that they're requesting by a specific due date that they will give you, then you'll be okay. Alternatively, and I've been in this situation myself where I've had to call a seed supplier and be like, hey, did you have this seed available as organic at the time? Because we forgot to record our seed search records. They can let you call folks during the inspection. The only thing that's a problem here is it's just making your inspection last longer and longer. And these inspections happen yearly. So organic certification, like once you're certified, but you still must be inspected on a yearly basis and reapply for your certification so that that certifier can see that you are still following the letter of the law and following your organic systems plan. So that might feel a little bit overwhelming, but once you're used to doing this process, it gets easier and easier each year to complete this inspection and record keeping process. So I want to leave the presentation this evening with a few specific issues that come up in organics from, fairly frequently actually, and tend to generate some controversy in the organic world. So plastic use is something that comes up frequently. And it's controversial in organics because plastics are technically a petroleum-based synthetic substance in most cases, and they're widely viewed as indispensable for weed control and irrigation. So using black plastic mulch is a practice that is sometimes used on organic farms. Using black plastic drip tape for on-demand irrigation and efficient irrigation. And these are all really common specialty crops practices. Then there's also the plastic used on structures like high tunnels. So these products are largely viewed as very useful. They can be used to reduce the need for tillage to control weeds. They provide a cheap method of insulating crops in a season extension situation like high tunnels and caterpillar tunnels. It's easily installed when it comes to things like drip tape and fertigation. But since they're synthetic, there's sometimes controversy about petroleum products leaching plastics into the environment. PVC, for example, is actually not allowed as a mulch barrier in organics because of its potential to leach harmful chemicals into the soil. So PVC is the one specific plastic product that is not allowed for use on organic farms in that method, specifically as a mulch. It can still be used in piping for plumbing, for example, just not as a mulch. So something else that I think is important to bring up about this, when we think about the issue of plastics leaching into the environment, there's also the idea of microplastics sloughing off of things like landscape fabric and black plastic mulch and drip tape. And I come back to this idea that there's a statistic that humans, you and I, have at least one plastic spoon's worth of microplastics floating around in our brains. And that kind of boggles my mind. So there are definitely times where I feel like I want to get away from plastic use in organic agriculture and in specialty crop farming generally, but because of its usefulness, it's really hard to step away. I want to share this slide as well. So this is not from Indiana. This is actually, that's my husband, Chris. We were on our honeymoon in Hawaii in 2017, and we visited the island of Lanai, which until 1992 was a long-standing pineapple plantation island that's just off the coast of Maui. It was a Dole Company plantation, and we had to pull over there's just one main road on this island. And when we left the harbor area in our little rental Jeep, we saw what looked like black plastic mulch just floating around on the side of the road. So we had to get out and take a look. And lo and behold, right next to Chris's feet there, you can see a drip tape line that is still intact, was still probably able to handle water. It wasn't really that deteriorated at all from the 20, 25, 35 years beforehand. I was just flabbergasted to see how this drip tape and black plastic mulch was still persistent in the environment. So that just goes to show how long it takes to break down, even though it hasn't been disturbed for 30 years. Something else that comes up frequently on organic farms is the issue of treated lumber. So there's a really great extension publication from the University of Tennessee that I have linked in our resources page at the end of the presentation that explains this issue of treated wood and why we don't allow the use of treated lumber in most cases on organic farms. So treated lumber, particularly thinking about lumber that's treated with arsenate or pressure treated lumber, is not allowed for use on organic farms because of the chance that this product might leach harmful chemicals into the environment. Now, on the one hand, it might not feel very sustainable to have to use untreated wood for things like high tunnel benches or fence posts in the case of livestock producers and so on. But there are hardwood options that can be used. So think about hardwoods like oak, cedar, those kinds of things. Those are typically the woods that we recommend. And those products, while they will have to be replaced more often, there's no risk of leaching chemicals into the environment. So that's the idea behind the treated wood thing. There are some issues where treated wood will be grandfathered in. So I encourage you to take a look at this document and kind of get a little bit more of an understanding of the treated lumber issue. It's a really common question that I get, if not maybe the most common question I get from beginning organic farmers. And then finally, there's the issue of hydroponics. So under the USDA rules, hydroponics and controlled environment agriculture are allowed to be certified as organic. And it's a huge area of growth in both the conventional and the organic market. Leafy greens and some herbs are, like basil, for example, are commonly grown in these types of systems. However, worldwide, so most international definitions of the term organic agriculture usually include some mention of soil as a concept, like planting plants into soil. The USDA definition does not include soil in the definition, so by the transitive property, hydroponics systems are allowed to be certified organic. And this is controversial among a lot of organic farmers. So there's add-on certifications you can get as an organic grower if you disagree with the hydroponic side of things, to show that you are a soil-based organic farmer. So the Real Organic Project is the label that you can find for that. And a lot of growers really believe in this concept of soil health and improving soil health on an organic farm. So they seek out, it's a free add-on that comes with an additional inspection just to show that you are not growing any products in a hydroponic system and representing those as real organic. So hydroponics has been scrutinized since the mid 90s by the National Organic Standards Board. And so this will probably continue to be talked about. However, in spite of this being on the agenda more than once with the NOSB, and the NOSB passing a motion to the USDA to prohibit the use of aeroponics in organic agriculture, which is production systems that basically spray nutrients onto the roots of crops instead of growing them in water culture. In spite of that, the USDA has not changed its policy on hydroponics. Aeroponics is uh, also still allowed for use in organic production, even though that recommendation was made. So just because the NOSB passes motions to make recommendations, sometimes the USDA will move on its own and decide what it wants to do with those recommendations. So here is our resources for the evening. I'd be happy to send out these slides to anybody who registered for the webinar this evening so that you can take a look at these on your own. This includes the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, the Organic Integrity Database, which you can use to search for organic farms in your area, as well as organic certifiers. There's also a link to a book that I absolutely love called Crop Rotation on Organic Farms, which is really great for helping you plan out what your crop rotations and cover crop rotations are like for organic farming, whether you're certified or not. There's also a link to OMRI, the NOSB, and a couple of USDA documents on who may not need to be certified, as well as the use of the organic seal. If you have more organic matter to discuss, I'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one. You may email me at my email address listed here, holmes9@purdue.edu, or you can give me a call on my office number, 496-6362, or my cell, 721-7597.